Hi and welcome to the show. I'm John Broons and this is the Family Business Show. Today I have with me Paul Galvin of Galvin Engineering. Paul is third generation from a family business, representing a family business that has 4 generations in one way, shape or form involved in and with the business. The transitions have gone for a number of years now, and Paul will be sharing his wisdom with us. I just want to thank our sponsors for today, and today's sponsor is Tech, the Executive Connection. I've been associated with Tech for many years. I've been both a member and a facilitator, a Tech chair. Tech is all about better decisions and better leaders. I think from my experience, the leadership and the learnings and the experience of the leaders of these groups have made a very big difference, a huge difference in my business life. And I think that if you contact them on www.tech.com.au, you can connect with Tech, the organisation, and I think it would be in your interests. So thank you, Tech. Welcome to the show. Today I have Paul Galvin with me. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, John.
Welcome to the show, and today we're talking about your family business.
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Tell me about the history of your family business. We talk about 4th generation offline, but where are you today and how did you get here?
Yes, well, we're officially 3rd generation, because that's where the ownership lays, but there is 4th generation in the business. But I guess it goes back to the beginning, starting at the beginning where it all started. Patrick Galvin, Irishman, hopped on a convict ship in 1830 and came to Tasmania. And that's how the Galvin started in Australia, so that was 1830. He was in the military, so he was on the other side of the cat o' nine tails. And he spent a little bit of time in Tasmania, then he was posted to Sydney, and he saw out his military career there. Then he went into pubs. So bondage, booze, it's in my blood, it's all good. And around about 1900, one of his great-grandchildren, I think, crossed the border to Western Australia. So that was about 1900. And in 1930, Roy Galvin, my grandfather, started the Galvin Group of Businesses, which was known as Roy Galvin and Company back then, and still is. And that was a plumbing merchant. And a plumbing merchant was, you buy product, plumbing product, taps and whatnot, and you sell it to the tradespeople, the plumbers. And we're talking about 1930, which happened to be 100 years after the first Galvin arrived in Australia, so a bit of a coincidence. And he found it very hard to get product. So one of the stories is that he had a mate in the double-decker buses. And he used to go over to the East Coast with his mate in a double-decker bus, and they would buy product, or they'd buy the double-decker bus over there, they'd buy product, and then he'd cart it all the way across the Nullarbor. Now the Nullarbor in those days was just dirt. There was no bitumen. So back in 1930, Perth was a very, very isolated city. It still is, but there was no bitumen on the Nullarbor. Air freight was out of the question. The supply chain from Southeast Asia didn't exist. So getting product was really, really hard. So you had to
Was it a week trip, a day, 2 or 3 days, or was it a month? Or
I don't know, but if you've seen pictures of the Nullarbor when it was dirt, there's bogged cars everywhere, and a hell of a journey just to get product for your store. So what he ended up doing out the back of the store in Northbridge, he set up a little foundry, he set up a little machine shop, a little assembly area, a concrete area, and a sheet metal fabrication sort of area to make some of the products that he found very hard to source in WA, being so isolated. And long story short, over many, many years, those little manufacturing areas became their own businesses and went off and set up elsewhere. And as time went by, they started supplying all sorts of customers. And not only that, but when they put bitumen on the Nullarbor and when Perth became part of the world, and especially when the supply chain from Asia unfolded, the big tsunami from China, then there was no need to have those manufacturing businesses anymore. So the foundry machine shop assembly became Galvin Engineering. The concrete and sheet metal became Galvin Concrete and Sheet Metal. And if you fast forward to today, you've still got it's called Galvin Plumbing Plus. That's Roy Galvin and Company, the original business, which is a plumbing merchant. They've got stores all around Western Australia, and they're still buying and selling plumbing products to plumbers and the public if they like. And then you've got the two manufacturing businesses that have gone their own way, and there's Galvin Engineering, which my brother and myself now own 100%, and that's it, just two owners. And one of my cousins bought Galvin Concrete Sheet Metal out of the group. So that's the two manufacturing businesses. The merchant business is quite large. It's now controlled and owned by my uncle's family, and my father got out of that 10 to 15 years ago. And so my generation, we've got two businesses now, if you like. There's Galvin Engineering that my brother and myself own and run, and then there's this big bag of cash that came when my father exited, and we also managed that.
So in effect, through the transition of the businesses, it wasn't really a pruning of the family tree. There was actually clear choices available to family members that they could travel their own path, so to speak, in their own family business. And you and your brother got along well enough to be able to work a business together, and your cousin's gone into a different business, and yet it's still, the family is still quite close.
So my brother and myself, we're big planners. No doubt we'll get to that. But I think my father's generation and my grandfather, there wasn't a lot of planning, and they did prune the branches of the tree. It was actually, my grandfather had 3 sons and no daughters, so we don't have to go there, just 3 sons, and one of them was a doctor. So when my grandfather passed and the 3 sons got the business, the 2 of the sons took my other uncle out, the doctor, and it came down to 2, and they were always about pruning the branches. And at some point in time down the track, my father took some of the businesses within the group by then, and my uncle took others. So Galvin Engineering came this way, Galvin Concrete went that way, as did Roy Galvin and Company.
So there was a very clear decision.
I think so. I don't think they did a lot of succession planning, but they were well aware that, we talk about the cousin consortium. I don't think they knew the theories behind that, and I might touch on that, but they certainly understood it was there, and they thought, well, let's simplify it. It's easier to go back to a single family model. So if you look at Galvin Engineering now, there's my brother and myself. It's a 3rd generation business, but it's got a 1st generation ownership structure again. Mm-hmm. Nice and simple.
Yep.
And we might prune one of the branches off the tree there as well. So the cousin consortium, there's this theory that the founders of the business, they know what's going on. They have great meetings, there's only one person in it, and everything goes tickety-boo. The 2nd generation grow up in the same household. They've got the same values, the same culture. They lick stamps on the weekend, they send out invoices, they in the back of the ute going to doing deliveries, and they infuse the business over the dinner table. And they get on. They've got the same cultures, the same values. They lived in the same house. The 3rd generation, the grandchildren of the founder, they all grow up in different houses. There's spouses involved, there's slightly different values, slightly different cultures. And when they're trying to run a business, there's a lot of that. And that probably doesn't work. So lobbing the branches of the tree is the easy way to go forward, and that's, I think, what they did that without really knowing the theory.
It's interesting though, you talk about it's now you and your brother that are now
Yep.
first generation, so to speak, even though the business is now third and transitioning to fourth.
Right.
And you mentioned your father stepping back and taking money off the table.
Yep.
Okay, because I think off camera you mentioned to me your father stepped out and you bought him out of the business.
Yep.
Then you know there's this accumulated family wealth.
Yep.
That is separate to the operation of the business. How does that get managed?
It's a very complex question. It's only going back 15 years and we're still working on that. But my folks are post-war generation, or they were small kids during World War II. And it was a tumultuous period, and it was all about storing money away. You know, those squirrels, storing the acorns for a rainy day. And that's been their mentality their whole lives. They don't spend much money, they don't live wealthy, if you like, and they've just accumulated money and accumulated money. And they got this big bag of cash, and that just went into invested funds, and it's been accumulating. So there's a whole question there that we've been through about what's the purpose of your wealth.
That's a great question that every family needs to come to grips with.
Absolutely, because they were just accumulating it because that's all they know. But the rainy days have gone. There's probably not going to be. We've had a good run, haven't we, in Australia? But understanding the purpose of their wealth was really, really important. We had a series of workshops, and we actually got to that. And we started addressing. I guess the elephant in the room was I used to say to my mum, "What's the purpose of your wealth?" She, "Oh, well, that's your problem. When I've gone, it's all yours." And eventually I said to her, "Mum, you'll probably outlive me, A," because, you know, she comes from good genes. But B, if you don't, I'll be in my 70s in a rocking chair and I won't care two hoots. And I said, the legacy you're going to leave if you don't structure this up is your kids are probably going to fight over it. Now, we get on swimmingly, don't get me wrong, really well. We're a very close family. But history would say those sorts of events, the worst comes out in people, everyone's grieved, and there's spouses and in-laws involved, and it can all go pretty messy pretty quickly. So managing that wealth has been a lot about estate planning, setting up wealth succession structures, and we've got to a point now, if they do fall off the perch tomorrow, it'll happen in such a way there's very unlikely to be fights.
And you've structured that wealth, your parents have structured that wealth with good advice, finding the right advisors that match them, and that you can communicate well with and you can share with. Was that an extensive search to find these experts?
Not really, because my brother and myself went to a conference, Family Business Australia, FBA, some years ago now, and it just turned so many lights on. We're busy in our business just working for the sake of working, and we didn't really have any vision about why we were doing this. It was just in our nature to work hard. And it switched a lot of lights on, and we started understanding wealth has to have a purpose, and your business must have a purpose, and you've got to have business governance, but you've also got to have family governance. And we went down the track of setting up family governance for our generation. And all of what we learnt there, we applied to my parents' wealth, and we went through this family governance process. And within FBA, they have a lot of advisors. I believe you're one. And FBA advisors, and we chose one that was close to us at the time, and he helped us through the process. And really, you got no idea where to start. You don't know what you don't know, and he stepped us through the process. We ended up with a family council. We ended up writing a family charter. We ended up documenting the purposes and the wealth of or the purposes of the wealth. We ended up setting structures in place so that when an event happens, the money goes down in a manner where there's not going to be any conflict, I suppose. So we've done all that.
You've really taken a lot of time and a lot of thought and a lot of planning. So they're three things that I can identify in listening to our conversation today.
Yep.
Would there be three things that stand out to you, getting to the point that you're at today, where the family's at and where the business is at?
Family and the business. I think the big one is understanding your roles. There's the family role, there's the owner role, there's the governance role, there's the management role. And family governance is a whole different process with a whole different people who get the family dynamics and ask you those big questions about the purpose of your wealth. So getting started on that process, back at the business, setting up a governance structure, a business governance structure, it's been really important for us as well. But my brother and myself used to have meetings 15, 20 years ago where we wore all four hats at the same time. A conversation would be about family conflict and ownership and management and governance and back and forth and all over the shop. There was no structure to it. We pulled them apart. And we now have our family council to discuss family issues. We have our owners meetings, we discuss ownership issues. We have our board of advice where we discuss governance issues, and of course we've got our management team. We don't talk about that in that forum, we don't talk about that in that forum, we pull them apart because they're very conflicting conversations.
That's fantastic, Paul. Thanks for enlightening not just me but all the people, all the viewers. So we're going to take a break now and we'll come back in just a few moments. Welcome back from the break, and I'm working with and talking to Paul Galvin from Galvin Engineering. Paul, we've just been talking off camera actually about some of the challenges that you've faced and the family's faced over the years. Can you talk about some of the challenges that you've had in your time working with...
In my time?
In your time, working with your dad, working with your brother.
Yep.
Trying to put together this family structure and the governance and the business, and
yep.
The last 15, 20 years has been an interesting time frame.
Well, I might talk about the business if I can, because talking about the business and the wealth management, it all gets a little bit messy. But in the business, our challenges have certainly been, probably the biggest one in my time frame, I've been there over 30 years, has been globalisation. So when I started there was virtually no products coming from Southeast Asia, and now it's been a tsunami, which has been good and bad as long as you move with it, but if you try and fight it you probably wouldn't be around. So that by far has been our biggest challenge, and finding our space within that. So maybe I should tell you that 30, 40 years ago we manufactured commodity items, commodity plumbings, generic sort of plumbing fittings, and some specialised tapware, but mainly generic products, low technology. Fantastic. Perth was very isolated, good business. But with China coming onto the scene and India and putting bitumen across the nullarbors, we had competition from the east. We had to get out of that space pretty quickly because high volume, low margins, price was all that mattered. There's no future in that in Australia. And by the way, I got no idea why my brother and myself bought into the business. Mature business, mature products, manufacturing in Australia. Well, what were we thinking?
So was that a something that was expected because you were the sons? Was it... it doesn't sound like it was planned. It was just,
No.
this is the right thing to do.
Well,
so there was an emotional ownership connection that you thought, I'm responsible to do this?
Yeah, so probably gone off a bit of a tangent, but
Yeah,
the history of me joining the business is I finished my engineering degree and I went out to Western Mining Kambalda in the mining industry, and I was in mill maintenance, and I wasn't there that long, but I was there a couple of years. But positions open up pretty quickly in the mining industry back then. There was no FIFO, you just lived there, and it's a pretty tough life. And I moved up pretty quickly. I was only there for 2 years, but I'd already envisaged that I was going to build relationships in the mine site and then set up a contractor shop over the road, and I don't know what it would have been called, and I'd subcontract back. And that was my vision pretty early on. But I got a phone call from my dad after a couple of years, and he said, look, Galvin Engineering, we've got a lot of projects on, we're really growing, it's fantastic, we desperately need a mechanical engineer, we're struggling to get one. Your family, how about joining the business? And he sort of guilted me into joining, I've got to be honest, because I had my own plan. But I had a girl back in Perth, so that worked for me. Who's now my wife, and has been ever since. So I was drawn back to Perth, and of course I got there on day one, realised it was all bullshit. There was no need for me whatsoever. So that was his way of getting me back into the business. We started calling him Old Sly a little bit about then. That was his way of doing it. But 5 years later, my dad and myself sat down. He's an engineer, I'm an engineer. My brother's an accountant, who I think had done a major in marketing at that point, or he's about to. We thought, gee, it'd be pretty handy having him in the business. So we rang him up and played the same con on him, and he joined the business, so that's where it all started. So yes, there was a degree of obligation. We've got 3 sisters, so there's 5 of us, me and my 4 siblings. The girls weren't invited. Why weren't they invited? So it's a different time. We probably can't judge that. But they were all teachers, physiotherapists, early childhood. Now, I'm an engineer, my brother was an accountant, so you can see how it made sense that we're invited into the business, and maybe that's the story, I don't know.
Okay. So the challenge really in that time for the business was the products coming from overseas, competition from over east.
Yeah.
And how was the marketplace? Was it just plain sailing? I mean, you started 30 years ago, and then 15 years after that,
yeah.
Was it Dad's step back?
Chris and myself actually bought our share off our uncle, and that's how it came over to our side of the family. So there was my dad and my brother and myself. My brother and myself owned 50%. And it was only a few years later that Dad stepped out, because I think we were doing well enough for him to say, well, this is okay, and he'd reached that mid-60s and he was ready to go. So he stepped out of the business. As far as the challenges go, it's certainly the globalisation, but I mentioned earlier we're a mature company with mature products, and we didn't really have a great future. It's just not sustainable. A business based on their products, based on price, it's a bad position to be in. So I think we knew enough to know that we had to we did some specialised tapware, laboratory and surgical tapware. We thought, well, that's probably the niche that we've got to get into. I mean, if you're going to survive in manufacturing in Australia, it's probably got to be a niche. And so we started growing and developing that. And to be honest, it's probably our overriding strategy, and it has been for 20 plus years, and it's taken that long to build up those products. And the generic commodity products, which is where we started, they've been okay. They haven't. We expected them to go like that, but they've actually continued to improve and increase, and we've been a bit surprised about that. And that's just been a bonus. That's a cash cow. But what we're on about, where we're going, is about this specialised tapware. So that's been our biggest challenge, our relevance, and fighting the tidal wave from China. And all those generic commodity products, by the way, we've shifted offshore to the third world. And we've had to do that. There was no option whatsoever, and it's working quite well. I've been going to China myself for well over 20 years and still go there annually, and we have a pretty good supply chain up there.
So you've worked well with your brother, your dad's left the picture, and you've been in the business, but working in the business for a long time.
Yep.
How did you step outside at the same time and start working on the business as well as being in the business? How challenging was there for you to keep growing and understanding and learning?
Yes, so I think we're oblivious to all of that. We just worked hard. We just ran a business. We just worked hard, and we weren't thinking too far ahead. And probably what I've just verbalised is that when we took over the business, we probably didn't actually think it had a great future. We've managed to reinvent it so that it's now on the bottom of the curve rather than the maturity curve again, and we're up and away. Just remind me of the question.
You pictured that as a challenge. I said, so how did you find this learning and the education that you needed? Because, you know, if I'm reading this right, you had a picture of, well, the business isn't looking too great, and we've just bought it. We're going to have to work incredibly hard to make it work, and we're going to have to change it. Where did you go to get the information?
Okay. So I know I was heading with that. So initially it was head down, arse up, and you probably got to do that. And then you start questioning your abilities, and you know, we don't have a business plan, and everyone else seems to have a business plan. You start talking to people as you mature. So I went off and did a course with Leadership Management Australia, Executive Development course, or whatever. It went for 6 months, and that just blew me away. You know, because you don't know what you don't know. It's all about strategic planning and personal planning and goal setting and all these wonderful things. And that put me on to reading Covey's book, The 7 Habits. Mm-hmm. By the way, I tell everyone there's 2 books to read. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Covey and Good to Great. So that one's about your personal, and Good to Great's about the business. If you read those 2, you're 80% of the way there. So I did Leadership Management Australia. I did Covey. I learnt all about goal setting and first things first and whatever his 7 habits are. And they're really, really powerful for me. And I've become an anal retentive planner. I have list after list after list and setting big goals. And then when I finished the LMA course, I thought, this is what I've been missing as a leader. I need more of this. And I wanted a monthly dose, so I ended up joining Tech. It was about 15 years ago, the Executive Connection, and that was just fantastic. So I got my monthly personal development dose, and in the afternoons on that same day we would discuss issues, and I'd learn from my peers about their businesses and how they go about stuff, and that put us on our personal development journey. My brother did the same sort of thing, and he was in Tech.
Did you challenge him to do this, or he saw you growing and he wanted a bit of that, or?
I can't recall which way it ended up, but possibly, I mean, he's 5 years younger than me, so I might have been a little bit ahead of the game as far as that went. But now, you know, we've been equals for 10, 15 years now, and he did Tech. So anyway, we've been very big on PD for our whole lives, really.
Great. We're going to take another break. Thanks very much for that, Paul. And we'll be back with you shortly. Welcome back. This is the Family Business Show. I'm John Broons, and today my guest is Paul Galvin, Galvin Engineering. So Paul, you've enlightened us this morning with some wonderful stories and some wonderful and really insights from you. Where to from here? Where do you see things going from here?
So there's no great secrets about what we're doing. It's probably the same couple of strategies that we've had for the last 20 years will endure, and that's moving from the commoditised low margin products to the niche products. And the other big strategy has been shifting from our focus on the Western Australia, to the East and broader. So the West has only got 13% of the population and therefore probably the activity. And breaking into the East has taken us decades. So they're the main 2 things going forward. But what we've done in the last 12 months, we've really nailed down our purpose. And conscious capitalism is another area that I subscribe to. I reckon it's fantastic, but they talk about purpose beyond profit, because the millenniums like to work for a company with a cause, and you've got to have a cause beyond profit. And we had to find out what ours was, and we went through an exercise, and we came up with our purpose statement, which is water solutions for a healthier environment. And what water solutions are is tapware and accessories and fittings, and a healthier environment's people and the land, or our planet. So another way of saying it is tapware for healthcare and land care. So we defined our purpose, and that means that we're really targeting bringing products that are going to help people and help our planet. So we spent a lot of time in Europe. They've got a lot of these products. We don't have the ability to manufacture them, to be honest. And we find the products that we think we can bring to Australia. So we're looking for world's best, and we're bringing it to Australia, which is a little bit what my grandfather was doing. He was finding the country's best in the east and bringing it to Perth. So we've just upped that a little bit. And we find these products and these world-class manufacturers, and we take them through the Australianising of their product, because we have DR brass requirements, we have low lead requirements, we have potable water test requirements, different strength, different water pressure, hard water, calcium. So the products don't suit Australia. We have to take them through a bit of a redesign. We have to take them through all the hoops of getting accreditation and certification, and they rebrand the products for us. So that's what we've been doing. So you see how that fits into our purpose. So we specialise in health tapware, education tapware, universities, schools, and correctional tapware, which is jails and prisons and whatnot. And the niche within the niche, that's our niche. We don't make tapware for mum and the kids. We make it for institutional tapware. But the niche within the niche is actually mental health. So whilst we're bringing world's best products to Australia in those areas, we're actually developing products we can take to the world in mental health, which is our niche within the niche. So that's what's new for us. My son, fourth generation, has joined. Tim, he's our IT manager. And he's dragging us into the digital world. Not kicking and screaming by any means. We're very aware of it strategically, and we want to be there. We just don't sort of get it. You know, my brain's wired analog, his brain's wired digitally. He gets it, I don't. We know we want it, we know what we've got to do, we know the relevance of social media and digital marketing, but the how is very hard for us. So he's doing that for us, and that's terrific. So developing a strong digital presence, social media presence, is really big for us, and pushing into that niche that I mentioned. There are two key strategies going forward.
And the family going forward? I mean, is Tim your only child, or are there daughters, baby?
Well, I'll start with my brother, and we have a family council.
Mm-hmm.
We just had a meeting recently, and we always talk about the next gen and where they might end up. And my brother and my sister-in-law, they've got two daughters. They look as though they're heading in a completely different direction. They're quite artistic and so, and we'd like them to join the business, but it's probably unlikely from a scenario planning point of view. I have three sons. My wife and I have three sons. The eldest is a civil engineer. He's off doing his own thing, and that's fantastic. And he almost definitely won't join the business. My second one's joined. He's our IT manager and doing a terrific job. And my third one's a diesel mechanic, working in one of the local firms here in heavy diesel. And he's most likely to join in a few years' time. So we have a scenario plan, a succession plan at Galvin Engineering. It's got times down this column. We've got three columns: management, governance, ownership, and we've got a bit of a scenario that may or may not play out, but we're aware of it. We put steps in place to make sure if it does unfold that way, people are ready.
What kind of conversations have you had with the younger generation, and when did you start having conversations with the younger generation?
Yes, we started pretty early because we saw a speaker at an FBA conference many, many years ago, and her view was the failure in third generation was the first generation spoke to the second generation, or maybe they didn't speak to them, but over the dinner table that was the topic every night. And the second generation infused the business, and they get it. The second generation do exactly the opposite. They put their kids in cotton wool, don't want them to go through all that stuff that I went through. The third generation probably don't infuse the business. It's not in their blood as much. They don't have the feel for it. So that really switched the light on for me. So we started talking to our kids about the business. So I don't know, it's a regular, but at least once a year. We did it not so long ago. They've all been invited to some of the Family Business Australia conferences and some other events. So we're just slowly, a bit of an awareness. On the other side, the wealth management of my parents' wealth, they're actually all involved in a next generation charitable foundation. So there's a bit of money that they manage, and they get together and meet, and this is the cousins, and they meet 4 times a year. They decide which charities are going to give the money to. So through that forum, we're raising their community responsibility. With wealth comes responsibility. So we're raising their philanthropic sort of values. They understand the family values because we have a family forum every year where my parents might get up and speak. We might get some outside speakers coming in. So
they work together? They work well together?
The cousins?
All the cousins?
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's a great place for them to learn how to communicate.
Great place for them to learn. They pick up a little bit of financial acumen because they're dealing with money. They get close to some of the charities and they quite enjoy it. They go there quite reluctantly, and then after a few meetings, the whole good that comes from it gets into them a little bit and they start enjoying it.
Can you see it being too many cousins eventually, or what's the plan there as far as the cousins managing the...
Yeah, that's interesting because we've got quite a range of ages from 7 or 8 up to 30.
Okay.
And probably the younger ones, the older ones to them are like grandparents in their eyes. So the older ones are probably going to drop out, the younger ones will come in just to keep it next gen and make them... It's a bit intimidating for a young kid to come in when there's 30-year-olds sitting in the room, even though they get on well, but they probably wouldn't have a voice. So we don't know where that's going yet, but it's likely that the older ones would come out the other side and the younger ones would come in. But we do have the foundation board that sits above the next gen board, sort of like a subgroup of it, and the older ones can go into that, and us oldies can step out off that in time.
And with the next gen, with your son who's now IT in the business,
yep.
Have you had conversations with him about his goals and where he wants to go with the business?
Absolutely, yeah. So when he joined, we explained to them there's the 3 circles. You can join as an employee, let's call that the management, or you can join as a director at some time in the future maybe, or you can join as an owner. So there's no reason you have to be in all 3 circles. So he's chosen to join the company at a management position, and we do talk about the possibilities in the other 2 circles, but it's not on his radar yet. He's mid-20s. Don't want to put too much burden and expectation on them. Just let him find his place there and the conversations will come. But it does put some onus on myself and my brother, who currently own the business. It's now becoming a bit more of a legacy situation where we're custodians of the business and we've got to wait and see how things unfold a bit.
Okay. Mm. So looking into the future, you have a bright and rosy picture of the next 5, 10, 20 years. You've got some plans in place. Everybody sounds like they know their place in the family as opposed to the business, and there's real clarity that you've got around that for each one. And you've got a lovely structure by the sounds of things
Yeah.
that everybody's able to communicate and share.
Yeah.
Getting together with the family in the future,
Mm.
do you plan that kind of thing as a once-a-year exercise, or for the next 5 years, or is it just birthdays and weddings and those sorts of things?
Oh, look, there's a lot of that anyway because we're predominantly all living in Perth and we're a fairly close family. We do have an annual family forum, which is the spouses are invited, my parents' generation, my generation, and our kids all get together in the one room and we talk about that sort of stuff. On the other side, my brother and myself, we have another family council which starts at the third generation and down. It's all getting very confusing.
To me, it's not confusing. I actually understand that,
Yeah.
you know, because we're talking limbs of a tree here. And although individuals work within a family, we also have to look after our own individual wealth.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing the conversation here is where you and your brother are creating your own individual wealth that will travel a different path.
That's right.
To your parents' wealth.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, very good. I think at this point we'll take another break and we'll come back and we'll get some more from Paul Galvin, our wonderful guest. Thank you. Welcome back to the show. I'm with Paul Galvin, Galvin Engineering, and we've been really, to my mind, enlightened today with Paul's very wonderful answering of some pretty big questions. So, Paul, in summation, to tie it all together, conversations that you've had, some wisdom that you've picked up, something you'd like to share, really the transitioning of generations. Is there anything special, say 2 or 3 key things that you can share with us?
Well, maybe the big one is you don't know what you don't know. And if you've got a family business, join Family Business Australia and learn what you don't know. And
I
meet
definitely
people.
agree with that.
Meet people, not necessarily like me, but I'm one of them, that can share their war stories, because that's the great thing about that organisation is, you know, we've heard some families that have torn themselves apart get up there and openly tell their stories and what they would have done differently, and we've learnt from that. From that comes setting up your family governance as well as your business governance. You know, most people know what they've got to do in their business, but the family governance is really, really important. We could talk all day on that. And the secret to that is to get a family business advisor just to get started. Once again, you don't know what you don't know, and get started on the process and see where it takes you. Certainly setting up governance in your business. We set up a board of advice. So my brother and myself are our formal board, and we sign a few documents every now and then, but we're not big on that. Our real governance is done in our board of advice. So it's not a fiduciary board. The directors don't have those sort of legal responsibilities. Well, you can argue that they do from a shadow director point of view, but pretty much it's quite simple. Our board's about performance rather than conformance. We do a little bit of both. We're trying to professionalise the business, not corporatise the business. I love my one-liners, by the way.
You're doing very well today, Paul, and you're really clear.
But professionalising rather than corporatising, we don't want to copy the ASX model of governance. It doesn't work for us. You know, we believe in best fit before best practice, or maybe best fit is best practice. But if you go and do the AICD course, which we've done, and it's fantastic, just be a little bit careful because you can over-corporatise your organisation. You may not want to do that. So we've been pretty big on setting up our business governance, setting up our family governance and getting started there. Secrets to business, define your purpose. We've spoken about that at length. Your purpose beyond profit. Get really clear on that, and your vision and your mission and your strategies all cascade down and become a lot simpler, and everyone gets your business what they're really there for. Getting the right people on the bus is really the big one. There's a lot of people will tell you that, getting the right people on the bus in the right seats and then getting the bus going in the right direction. A big part of that's culture. And everyone's talking about it at the moment. It's no secret to family businesses. That's what we trade on, really. But I reckon a lot of family businesses don't know what their culture is and they haven't defined it. And whilst you can't measure culture, the culture of a tribe in Middle Australia versus a tribe in Middle America, completely different cultures, different traditions, different dress, different dances, and that's their culture. There's no right and wrong, but you can define your values, and you can define your behaviours, and you can employ on those, and that's what we do. We've defined our values. We have a values questionnaire. Anyone who applies for a job who gets past the first screening has to go through this values questionnaire. If they don't get green, they're probably not going to get a second interview. So getting the right people on the bus that are your people, that get your way of doing stuff, I think that's critical.
Fantastic. Paul, I want to thank you very much for sharing with us today. It's been an insightful interview and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thanks very much. Two other things, if you can please subscribe, and if you have some comments, please send them through to John Broons, the Family Business Guy. I just want to thank our sponsors for today, and today's sponsor is Tech, the Executive Connection. I've been associated with Tech for many years. I've been both a member and a facilitator, a Tech chair. Tech is all about better decisions and better leaders. I think from my experience, the leadership and the learnings and the experience of the leaders of these groups have made a very big difference, a huge difference in my business life. And I think that if you contact them on www.tech.com.au, you can connect with Tech, the organisation, and I think it would be in your interests. So thank you, Tech.